I'm Alison Sterling and I'm Artistic Director for ArtLink, which is an arts and disability organisation in Edinburgh, in Scotland. If at any point you don't understand what I'm saying, tell me to speak slowly and say you have no idea what I'm saying, and I'll say it again. ArtLink is sort of, it's an arts organisation that uses its imagination, and you'll get an idea of that as the talk goes on. I'm going to go off context and then I'm going to go back into context, just to set the context for the speakers. But off context, does anybody here have a car? It's America, you all have cars. Okay, do you know what a jumper cable is? Yes. Okay. A jumper cable goes into a bar and the bar manager says you can come in, but don't start anything. I had to tell that. There was a rude one, but I didn't get that one. Change your glasses. Okay, I'm going to read something which is the start of the context. If I go, reading is a terrible thing. Anyway, well, it's not really, but when I do it is. I'm just talking about a world where we find ways to listen to what people are trying to tell us. The minutest response, the tiniest flicker of an eyelid, becomes the most enlightening of interactions, communicating new understanding and experiences. The mundane everyday of sitting doing nothing, of not knowing what to do or not having the freedom to do it has been transformed. Teams of people work together, learning from each other, turning responses into creative actions. Games are played, strange objects hurtle across rooms, laughter is heard over the sound of music and voices. Three-dimensional bubbles of light bounce around walls, chairs dance and spin as images throw themselves onto the viewer. The impossible becomes possible, and the ignored become positively visible. I'll talk about slight obsession. I'll change my glasses. The obsession is with people with profound developmental disabilities, if you know what that is. And that's people with sort of various challenging behaviours as well. And how, when you work with these people, the minutest response can be translated by artists and made into something that has to be of benefit to them and also can be of aesthetic value. And I've been working on this project for a long time now. I've been the last 7 years on this particular project, for the last 25 years, particularly around the area of developmental disability in the arts. I started 7 years ago the IdeasTeam. There should be some images come up here very quickly, setting the context, but I don't know where they are, so I couldn't describe them. But a brief introduction to the IdeasTeam project was we had to get specialists together around the person with profound developmental disabilities. Now they were key to the project. They informed what the artwork was going to be, and they informed it because we started to understand what they were saying to us, even although they couldn't speak. Now that was, and they couldn't communicate the way we understand communication, but we had to learn what that was, and as a result of learning these different behaviours and translating what they were saying to us, artworks developed. So one, for instance, with a Canadian artist called Clara City, we worked with a psychologist, a team of experts from Dundee, some smell specialists, I can't remember what it's called, and we developed with two guys over 2 years. We learned what hand movement went. Was it a positive thing? Was it a negative thing? Was the flutter of an eyelash? What did that mean? Did they like the smell? So every night for 2 years, the care workers in the house, and we would test smells that were sent to them. Over that period of time, the care workers or caregivers, I think you call them, actually started to look at people in an entirely different way. They understood them in an entirely different way. And I think that's what the IdeasTeam project's about, bringing people together from different backgrounds and actually changing perspectives and understandings of people. And that includes each other, and that includes the art that's produced as well. I forgot to set the timer on how long I had. So what happened at the end of that project was we developed, or the artists developed, identified two main smells that people like. One guy liked the smell of stables, and latex. He was a fetishist. And the other guy liked the smell of dandelions. Now what stories that you put around that dandelions, you imagine this guy has startle reflex still, and he's 35. And he's lying in a field, in your imagination he's lying in a field, he's out of his wheelchair, and he can smell the dandelions. How amazing is that? Even if it's not true, it's the stories that we put round that start to change your perspective and start to change your understanding of individuals, which is really, really important. So I'm going to start to introduce people to talk now, but it's this idea that you bring people from different backgrounds together, including people with developmental disabilities, and you start conversations, you start ways of thinking about things, about how art can be produced. Is the art a benefit to that individual? And sometimes you bring people together who have no understanding of disability at all. That doesn't matter, actually, it's what we bring to the table, it's their experiences that are really important. And in Edinburgh, which is the capital of Scotland, where we all wear kilts, I organised a conference which brought together some people I'd met at MIT. I came over for 3 months last year to look at the idea of developing these sensory spaces and changing a day centre that does exist in Scotland into a new sort of centre, which is a creative centre, a centre where you learn from each other, and where the main people you learn from are people with profound developmental disabilities. So I wanted to get people into a room to talk to each other, and I invited Wendy and Kelly over from Boston, and Steve works for Artlink, he's an artist who works for Artlink. So what I'm going to do is just recreate that a wee bit for you, and then I'm going to open it up to you at the end, and you actually look for the crossover. You look, because this is about being creative, and you're all creative people. And you look for the crossover, because it's a crossover between their ways of working, which is what we work with, and what makes things happen. They'll not do that for you. You've got to do the work. So after they've talked, you've got a job to do. So I'm going to introduce Steve first, and I'm going to timer on him, which I didn't put myself.
I'm really interested in ideas. You might think that ideas from fine art or theory might be compromised in relation to disability. It's completely untrue. I'm really interested in colliding the highest ideas with this other world to try and cause change. This is John Latham, who's an English artist who died in 1996, who I think is very fascinating. He was interested in changing subject-object relationships between, you go to a gallery, look at a static object, that's a very traditional relationship with an object, and you kind of have some kind of either reverie or you might think ideas. He was really interested in the notion of event structure, and he challenged the notion of physics. Physics is all about wave particle, the smallest event in physics is the particle. And for John Latham, he was interested in duration and event. And for him, consciousness was all about events overlapping in time. And the least event was the shorter duration of nothing to something. It's a really beautiful idea. And he was really interested in creating art to cause real change in kind of social structures. And in the 70s, he started a group called the Artist Placement Group, which is kind of a precedent for the way we work. And it's really exciting to try and put artists in different contexts to try and cause something to happen. This is John Latham's house on Bellenden Road in South London. It's called Flat Time House. I won't speak too much about it. It's really interesting. It kind of influenced the way I thought about how we work in terms of the workshop. We just work with an hour, but this hour is a very special, condensed time. There's a kind of exchange of energies almost between me and the people we work with. This is Jim Colquhoun, another artist from Glasgow, whose his own practice is really interested in situationism and psychogeography and narrativity and stories. So within the workshop, we worked through a huge raft of ideas about, we wore masks, we used smells, we brought herbs in, we used lenses, lights, laser beams, things that vibrated, things that we found in charity shops, thrift stores, different costumes, absolutely to try and find something that might key to somebody's subjectivity. People who work have got unique subjectivities. For us, we've got a certain ordered way we behave in the world. For us, maybe the eyes are at the top, the ears are secondary. I'm really interested in these kind of perceptual balances, and I've learned a great deal from working with people that have got so-called disability to change the way I think about the world as well. So we've used fibre optics, colour, light, and for us, when we create these spaces for an hour, and as soon as people are over this threshold into the space we're working with, it's a kind of non-institutionalised space, it's a non-hierarchical space, and everybody's equal. And we're never told so-and-so has autism or this or that. We treat people equally, and we try and change that. People come with a kind of imposed narrative, perhaps. So-and-so does this, they hurt themselves. People with severe autism might hit themselves, kind of get an endorphin rush, because their world is very inward, their subjective is kind of placed in on itself, because the world as they see it is very kind of incredibly scary, so they turn in on themselves for a reaction. And we try and, through what we do, we try and get into that feedback loop, try and open up the world so it's kind of less scary, and also they've got choices might start to open, however tiny. Because these people, they're outside of capitalism, they're outside of choice, and the world's kind of imposed on them, and we try and work with them to kind of create tiny events for them that might change their world quite radically, but it might be a tiny little detail. So a lot of our work is looking for tiny details, observing, sitting, being incredibly patient, and see what might happen. So we've done this kind of Bruce now, and so we've Jim and I videoed our eyes. We think about the perception of eyes, sight, just looking, and made that huge for someone that we thought was interested in looking at eyes. So we did that one day. So all the time we're continually riffing on what we've learned, what we think we've learned, reassessing what we've done in the past, and using that to move forward. So we go forwards, backwards, sideways, back to front, and continually thinking about what we've done. There's no one session that's ever the same. It's constantly improvised. And we've used masks as well. I mean, I'm quite a shy-ish Yorkshireman, quite dour, but pushable sometimes. But if you put a mask on, instantly your identity changes, and for us that's really important. It's quite theatrical, but instantly your own behaviour changes, and you can feel able to do other things we would do in the past. So we create tents that immerse people within a video experience. So it becomes not just looking at kind of hard screen, but physically within a kind of moving light environment. And also, sounds become much more important. Within contemporary art, it's been a kind of sonic turn away from visual art. Looking is quite a cold thing. The ear is a far more sensitive organ. So we started doing things. I do a thing called a feral choir with care workers, where we give each other a noise, and we use that to kind of create an energy, and everybody's kind of implicated in this kind of soundscape. So we've been working much more with sound. It's been incredibly fruitful in gaining new reactions. So we've made boxes that make sound, been hacking electronics, getting toys, and repurposing them so they do other things, causing little short circuits. So kind of formerly, toy like that toy phone, it's a video lecture, I think, the next one. Not working, anyway. So we create these soundscapes where it's very immersive, there's colour, there's light. So within this space, we're listening together with people that have got disability, and we're using that kind of sound as a kind of bridge into their world, and also trying to find a link back. So this is just an old toy phone I've hacked and put different circuits into it, creates other sounds. We used to use a lot of recorded sound, but I felt it's very much a product. People always come to the store like, oh, they like ABBA, and I wanted to allow people to create their own sounds and their own soundscapes. So it wasn't commodified, so it was kind of instant within a space, but we developed the sound, and that became this kind of bridge into this other sensory world, and also feedback from that to me. We started using a thing called a chaos oscillator. People who are into music might know what that is. It's a really kind of a democratic thing to make music, but you just need to touch it. It makes incredible sound. I'll show you that in a minute. This is a toy that I put a resistor on. It's a different sound. That little thing's called a bristleizer. This is a thing from 1970. I remade it. So a thing from a band called Throbbing Gristle, invented industrial music. This is Natalie. I started using an iPod to touch with her. Her touch is very sensitive, and she got really excited when she found that she could make sounds doing this one thing. I'll take last one. These images are not working, but anyway. This is Denny. When we're doing the feral choir, Denny's very autistic, very much in his own world. And one time we were doing this collective sound, making a soundscape, and the first time he's ever touched anything, he picked something, it was like banging it. And for us, that might just be a very small thing. For Denny, it was a huge thing for him to have done. So sometimes we get these references which are really profound for somebody. We should be seeing Denny here rocking back. So I made a kind of mixed feedback noise, and as Denny rocks forward and backwards, he's making the feedback wave. Can you work this out?
Work it out?
Well, actually
Pick
showing
up the
us
video,
out, but not an image. Anyway, for Denny, that's a really profound thing that he knew that as his body moved forward and backward through space, he could create this feedback sound. And also, Denny never makes any sound. We listened to him very closely, and we could hear a kind of tone he was making that was kind of in tune with the feedback sound. Again, that was another kind of huge leap in terms of his responses to the world. That's me.
The videos are forward.
This is Michael. Before, he didn't really touch anything, and we started to realise that he quite liked touching a keyboard and making a sound, and that's kind of feedback for him. So he and I kind of did a piece together where I was using the cassettes, making something, kind of creating this kind of sound together. And if you look at Michael's expressions, listening very intently, he knows that we're kind of communicating together through sound. That's it.
In my 10 minutes, I just want to talk about two projects that I did that came about as a result of collaborations. And the first one produced the Explorers Club, and the second one, a floor for tactile sound. So this is the work of the Explorers Club. The Explorers Club has 3 members. Addie Fuller, who was then my student assistant at MIT. Stefano Macaulay, who was then 12 years old, and myself. And on various days, but we should say that the membership was fluid. That was sort of the 3 core members, but sometimes the membership would expand, and on this day there were 2 filmmakers who came with us. So the purpose of the club's main activity was to explore, and in the process lay down these long orange lines of caution tape. Stefano is autistic, and because of his autism, he has challenges processing what he sees. And his eyes are perfectly fine, but it's sort of putting together the spatial visual information, placing it all together is a challenge for him. And when I first met Stefano, his mother told me that he was wearing glasses, these framed glasses. And even though his eyes were fine, she was guessing that the reason he insisted on wearing glasses was because of the framing, the literal framing of the frames, the glasses frames. And so we set out initially just to try to explore space and for me to understand it the way he did. And so we used tape. We started off with blue painter's tape and framing spaces. And by doing that, we're taking really large spaces and chopping them up into smaller, more containable spaces. In particular, Stefano doesn't, at that time, didn't like large open spaces when he refused to enter, a large plaza. And so those were the first spaces that we explored. And we found that by laying down this line, that it somehow organized the space or created a border. I'm not really sure why, but it became a space that then we could go to. So the club met once a week for 3 hours, and our goal became to explore Boston and go to every subway stop on the system, and in the process sort of lay out these lines, which for me became a large drawing over the city. All of the club activities take place in public. We're not separate from the public, but we're very much a part. We are one of many publics, and very much a part of that space. And I should say that we are a club because I don't have a relationship with Stefano. He's not my, I'm not his teacher. I'm not his therapist. We're club members, and as club members, we're all equal and equally invested in this activity together. But over 2 years, the club has evolved, and I'm really no longer needed. Stefano has taken club activities onto his own, and here he is in the Red Sea vacationing with his family. And in the evolution of the club, sort of Stefano and I sort of evolved in different directions, and he became really quite an expert at laying down the line and running all over Boston. And I think we have hit every single subway stop. I became more and more interested in this line drawing that we were making and running after him and photographing the orange tape. And so now I'm in the process of making a book about a story about the orange line. And Stefano is off onto his own explorations. This is another project that started as a walk in the city. It's a different kind of collaboration. This is with a group of MIT students and Gallaudet University students in Washington, D.C. And Gallaudet University is a school, you may know, that's sort of the hub of deaf culture, not just in the country, but globally. And everybody communicates with ASL through American Sign Language. And so I took a group of MIT students to Gallaudet to work with students there to try to understand the shape of deaf space. And we weren't looking at deafness as lack of audition, but rather as a spatial, how one who is deaf could understand space, and sort of how you organize yourself within it. And so here we're trying to map out the space, the configuration of a conversation between two deaf and two hearing individuals and one interpreter. In the process, I became really interested in vibration as another way of communicating. I think that it started when we were sitting in a bar and someone was trying to get someone else's attention, and they just pounded on the table, and it was enough to get the beer to ripple, and people looked up, and then communication could happen. And so we invited the students to MIT the following semester, and where I worked with some students and built a floor for tactile sound. So this is a platform, 12-foot square, and underneath the platform there's large electrical, mechanical transducers, so like huge coils of copper. And it's like a speaker, but without the speaker cone. And what it does is it takes sound and plays it through the floor as vibration. And vibrations are in the low range, like 20 hertz. You not only hear through your ears, but you hear through your body. You hear it in your organs, and you feel it in your joints, in your bones. And that was the range that I was really interested in. So this is a group of MIT and Gallaudet faculty and students and everyone's lying on the floor, and they're all listening and hearing through their bodies. And I think here, just because of their expressions, I actually think everyone's listening to feeling a cat purr in this situation, which is a really sort of intoxicating feeling or sound experience. And then we held a 2-day conference on the floor. And on the first day, I invited 20 different researchers to come and speak about their work with low-frequency vibration. And so there were engineers and biologists and marine biologists and seismologists and an amazing array of people. Each could speak for, I have 2 minutes, they each could speak for 15 minutes apiece. And as they spoke, we played their research through the floor. And so the participants at the conference could lie on the floor and feel the sound of a mantis shrimp communicating, for example, or feel the vibration of an earthquake. And then on the last day, we had a performance and dance party on the floor. And I had invited a number of musicians to compose pieces in the low register, that 20 hertz zone. And so a lot of people came, and it was sort of a silent party, and everyone sat on the platform, packed in together like sardines, and experienced the concert through their body. I think in this picture, Eric Gunther is beatboxing, and he's sitting on the floor, and he has the mic up against his throat, and everybody is feeling the effects of his beatboxing through their bodies. And I'm going to end there.
Hi, my name is Kelly Dobson, and I was thrilled to meet Allison when she came to visit, to meet Steve. I've known him for a long time, and some of the, we're not going to spell them out, but some of the themes of the work, I'm really excited for the work that we're starting to do together, and some of the discussions that I'm sure we'll have today. And so I'm just going to show some projects. So in the late 90s, I was living in Somerville and noticing people were starting to have personal devices. I trained as an artist first, and then I went back and trained as an engineer in grad school because I wanted to address some of the impact of technology and the role of technology in our personal scale and social, cultural, political lives. So this project was in response to some of these personal devices, which were always hidden, discreet, but were extending our memories or extending our abilities to be connected to corporate structures. And I wanted to make a device that maybe addressed a need that wasn't as marketed to yet, but that was unmet need. So.
I'm Kelly, and this is my screen body. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you really have to scream, but you can't because you're at work, or you're in a classroom, or you're watching your children, or you're in any number of situations where it's just not moving? Well, screen body is a portable space for screaming. It is in response to society's intolerance to the natural act of screaming. In many societies, people are taught, both implicitly and explicitly, not to scream when the instinct arises. But not letting out and dealing with what one is experiencing has negative repercussions, ranging from tenseness to incapacitating physical and emotional disorders. Screen body acts as a surrogate lung. It holds the user's screams so that their own body does not have to. When a user screams into screen body, their scream is silenced. But it is also recorded for later release.
And so if you want to, it's on YouTube if you want to make your own. And then as I was making this project, the big dig was going on in Boston too, you know, that project. And everyone was upset about the noise and all the displaced rats and everything that's happening. And so I went down, I would go visit this, well, even just walking down the street where I lived, in Boston, walking around Boston, I would come across the sites because I was thinking about spaces for vocalizing. I noticed that if you stand near some of these construction machines, it's also a safe space to vocalize because you can stand there and scream and no one can really hear you. And then so I practiced that, and then I noticed too that some of the machines would have resonant tones like in their motors, and if you sung in resonance with them, you couldn't separate them, the machine from you. So sometimes I feel that the machine was driving me, pulling me along to make expressions that I wouldn't otherwise have been occasioned to make. And sometimes I felt like I was driving this 10-story cement pump truck or crane or something. So it became this interesting non-language based kind of therapy in a way. It was getting me to make movements and sounds that I wouldn't have otherwise ever. And so I started to bring other people to the site. I engaged with the machines. And then I brought people to the site to do this. And then also I held sessions inside. Then I started counting machine therapy and looking at the side aspects of machines, not the things we purposely have been designing into them, but the sounds and the gestures and the vibrations and other things, socializing things, the things that are getting inscribed into people just as a byproduct. I'm trying to address those directly, both critically and it's like in between therapeutic and also just looking critically at what is happening in the cultural and personal and political landscape as machines are iterated and certain qualities are brought through. I mean, not just construction machines, but the construction machines as metaphors for logic practices. So I had sessions indoors with people with small machines too. And then I started thinking, well, so you could say maybe I was hallucinating when I thought that I was dragging the big cranes with my voice. I mean, I don't know, it might have been a little influence there, but I thought, well, what about if I really could design machines that were in real time and interacting with people. So I started with domestic appliances from the 40s, and thinking about how those machines came into our homes, they became, you know, by US anyway, wanting to be placed in our homes and in a way inscribe a certain social and personal role with people. And so I wanted to take some of these machines and instead of approaching them as they are designed to be approached with interfaces that remove you from their actions, I wanted people to have the opportunity to, with their bodies and what their bodies know, interact with the machine on a visceral, guttural level, and see what some of that could be.
Ah!
machine models to recognize what people which machine they're trying to talk to. So if you're a machine therapist and you have your whole range of machines, or if you're at home and you have a lot of machines, they can, because our voice is actually so different than the sound making mechanisms of them. So I was going to, I'll just say one person making it up. So I had people work with the machines and then do their best ways of sounding like the machines and use that to train the machines. So here are a bunch of different machines. And then I just want to talk for the last minute about the more recent work, which is addressing companion robots and these healthcare robots. I was noticing in my own research work and looking at the robotic research going on that there are some common similarities between the robots coming out of labs to help in aid healthcare, and they tend to not be whole or like at least mostly whole organisms, like a nurse or grandchild or an animal that we recognize. They're all interacted with in codified ways, so you know how to pet the thing, you know, they'll tell you with language like, did you take your meds, or you should go on a walk. But it's all cognitively translated. And I want to go back to these things that our bodies know, our bodies process and contain feedback to us, and how by making the entity a whole social organism, it also imbues that social entity with the ability or agency of care. Like you can imagine quickly that that thing actually cares for me, but it's a machine that doesn't actually care as we know care now. And I'm thinking about what does that mean long term to our definitions of care and our own thoughts of care, and if the care is something that can be bought and prescribed in this way. What is that doing? So I want to open up an opportunity for machines that could be aiding in care, but keeping the agency in the person themselves or in their loved ones. So it's making these organ-like machines that can be taken on and become imagined, like with my construction machine, as part of you, but also separated, and also linked between people. You have multiple ones linked. So I'm going to show this video because we don't have time. But the first one is a breathing machine. So if you hold it, it senses your breathing and starts to breathe with you, and then it if you're hyperventilating or something, it will notice that, and it'll stay in train to be breathing with you, but slowly guide you to a healthy breathing pattern. Or working on ones now for linking large groups of people through this visceral interaction. So groups can't communicate, haven't been able to communicate with language or these more codified law systems. Can they be linked viscerally at first to add some bridge that then could be used for conflict transformation and open